And PPT. Very good evening to everyone in this meeting, the first session of the course, I should say a new course on air transportation. Right now, people are joining the meeting. My request is it's better if you rename yourself so that I can know your names. Right. So let's start. So we have a very long agenda today. The first thing that I would like to talk about is the examination date. There is some good news for those who have not registered for the examination so far. We will then take a few questions from the learners which have been received. Some questions we could not include here, those we will answer on the discussion forum. And then I will give you some information regarding the world's shortest flight. After that, we open the channel for feedback, suggestions, and complaints and talk to you about the discussion forum. And finally, as always, we will open it up for queries. So welcome to the first interaction session. So the last date for exam registration was supposed to be 16th February. But just a few minutes ago, we received a confirmation that this last date has been extended. And now you have another 3-4 days to register for the examination. So all students who have not registered for the examination so far, or you think you have missed the deadline, you are lucky that you have time. Till this Friday, you are allowed to register for the examination. Now, some of you might wonder, what is the advantage of taking the examination? Why should we do the examination? There are many, many important reasons. Watching the videos of the course on NPTEL is nothing different than watching a movie in a cinema hall. You get a lot of excitement and thrill when you are in the cinema hall, but when you come back home, you absolutely forget. There is no test of whether you have learned something or not. So the real test of learning happens when you are examined. Okay, because videos can be seen like movies. The assignments that you submit as part of the course, you get nearly a week or 10 days to do them. So that's also not a real test of your learning. It is just a test of your recall and appreciation of the videos. It just confirms that you have watched the videos carefully. When you appear in the examination and secure the minimum overall 40% marks, because you have to independently clear the assignments portion of 30% weightage and the examination portion of 70% weightage. Together, you must get overall 40% marks. Then you are eligible for a course certificate, which mentions the details of the marks secured by you. So that is the proof of the exposure to the subject, not just watching the videos. Another very important facility that is available now under the new education policy of 2020 the so-called NEP 2020, is that you can, in many institutes, claim credit waivers for the courses that you clear on NPTEL. Some colleges allow 2 courses, some allow more. That you have to check with your institute. The other thing is that taking part in the NPTEL gives you an exposure of how teaching and learning happens in IITs. Not all of us are fortunate enough to get admission to IITs. I myself could not get into IIT at the undergraduate level. I was able to enter at a master's level. So NPTEL courses are a good exposure to the way we do teaching and learning at IITs. And if you give the examination, you can very proudly claim that you have cleared an examination of IIT standard. But all this is very generic in nature, and you might not get really motivated. But the next point about the examination is really very, very high on motivation. And that is, if you are in the elite gold category where you secure more than 90% marks overall, then you become eligible for paid internships by NPTEL under the professor. In fact, there have been examples when you can do internship under some other professor also. And this is, I believe, one of the very interesting and useful features of writing an NPTEL examination and clearing it. Because I receive a large number of emails from students asking for internship, and I try to call them and tell them that I give internship primarily to students who have done well in my courses. Because then I know that you have the basic exposure to the kind of research I do or the kind of topics I work on. So then it will be easy for me to incorporate your internship into our ongoing projects or research initiatives. So what is the problem in appearing the examination and securing a paid internship? I'm not saying that you will definitely get internship. You become eligible, and the professor who gives internship will have their own criteria. Some of them may interview you again. Some of them will offer only one internship. Some of them may offer 5, and some might say, no, I'm not giving any internship. So you only become eligible. But the first requirement of doing an internship is being eligible for that. So according to me, the most important and the most useful aspect of NPTEL examination is the last point of becoming eligible for paid internships under the professors. Okay, moving ahead. This internship, you can see online, there are a lot of interesting rules. On the right, you can see the duration of the internship. It varies from 2 weeks to 12 weeks. And the internship amount is a healthy amount of 15,000 rupees a month. Most of these internships are supposed to be in person. That means you are supposed to require and come and work in our laboratory. But I have also offered online internships to some people. That depends upon the concerned course faculty. The certificate that you get is a very nice certificate. This certificate mentions the details of on what topic you have worked, with whom you have worked, from when to when you have worked. And the good thing is that this can be verified by anybody. This can be verified by anybody by going onto the NPTEL website. So it's a certified claim of doing an internship which can be verified by anybody. So therefore, my request to all of you is consider very strongly to register for the examination and to appear and clear the examination so that you can submit a proof that you have done this course and done it properly and you have learned. Now, we'll move ahead to some questions which we have received from the learner or learners of this course. We will take one by one the questions. The first question that I want to cover is by, so It says that the seventh and eighth freedom of air, like why an airline from a different country will operate domestic in some other countries. What might be the reason for this? The reason for this is purely money, financial. An airline has a spare capacity and it looks at a market. So let's imagine there is an airline such as, to give you an example, let me look at an airline like Emirates. Okay. Or to give you a live example, there is an airline called Air Asia. This airline operates domestic flights in India from, say, Goa to Mumbai or Goa to Bengaluru because it feels that there are a large number of passengers available to travel from these two destinations, and it can compete with domestic airlines in that sector because it is anyway operating to India for international operations, but on the side it can make more money by operating as a domestic airline. So that is the reason why we have this. Now the next part of the question is, why not it scheduled back to its own home country? How the domestic operation in other countries being helpful? I'm more interested to know the scenarios with some real life airline carrying operations. I gave you the example of AirAsia, okay, which has done this southern operation. This question came from Prachi, who is also there in the meeting today. Prachi has another question which is related to the rules for routes to be operated for rationalizing the operations. But when anyone starts an airline with a limited number of aircraft, do they already take care of these rules? So, Prachi, they have to take care of these rules. Rules are rules. For any airline, rules are rules. They have to follow these rules and they cannot take an exception. For example, you have given an example that if they are operating 10 aircraft on 20 trunk routes, so now they have to operate 10% on CAT 2 routes. But with limited number of aircraft and a starting phase, how do an airline stick to this rule? Or this has to be considered before starting the airline? That is the answer. When they plan the aircraft operations in India, they have to follow the rules of India. Now, why are these rules given? Why does the government insist on 10% of the capacity to be launched on CAT 2 routes? Simple reason is that most airlines want to make money by traveling only on the trunk routes. But the government wants larger number of cities to be connected. So the CAT 2 routes are the routes which are not the main routes, which are not the routes that make big money or there is a big demand. So by forcing an airline to fly 10% of the operations on CAT 2 routes, the government is ensuring that more people get benefit of air connectivity. So they tell the airline, you make good money on the trunk routes. We don't stop you. You can fly as many aircraft as much you want. But whatever you deploy on category 1 routes, 1/10 of that you must deploy on CAT 2 routes. This is the obligation. Okay, this is an obligation that the government insists. Next question, again from Prachi, is what are the job opportunities for an aerospace engineer in civil aviation? The aeronautical organizations like DGCA, Aircraft Investigation, Accident Investigation Board, Airport Authority of India, ICAO, IATA, do they recruit aerospace engineers? The answer is very few because these are mostly in the field of aviation, not aerospace engineering. Now, many colleges which are offering a program in aeronautical engineering or aerospace engineering, they have started to incorporate certain courses in their syllabi to make the students attractive for these airlines, these agencies, sorry. But you know, DGCA, AIB, AI, etc., these are mostly regulatory bodies or statutory bodies. ICAO and IATA are organizations. They are not interested in the knowledge that aerospace engineers have regarding the aircraft fabrication, design, operation. They are more interested in the people who have license to operate the aircraft. They are interested more in technicians and AMEs. So those guys have opportunities in civil aviation. Aerospace engineers per se, they do not have many opportunities. However, there was a time in the past when many aerospace engineers were hired by airlines and then they were groomed as the maintenance engineers, because to be able to do an examination, to appear in the examination for getting a license, you need to have experience of 2 years. So earlier it was very common for Air India and Indian Airlines to hire engineers from aeronautical institutes, but now mostly you get manpower for civil aviation from the dedicated courses on civil aviation and not aerospace engineering. Then, is there a possibility of changing the conventional exam for course completion assessment for the certification process? As this course is knowledge-based, can the assessment be carried out in the form of application-based, like giving a case study or problem statement? So it may ensure not only testing our memory, but about the rules, but testing our understanding. So unfortunately, that is not possible for us because we conduct the examination of this particular course in an online manner all over the country. And for us to create a question paper that will require this kind of an application is quite difficult because the paper has to be corrected in an automated fashion. If we make the question paper too generic or open-ended, then there will be multiple answers possible, and therefore, how do you evaluate? But we will keep in mind that if possible, we will create a question paper that does not focus more on testing your memory about the rules, but testing the understanding. So don't worry, we are not interested in testing your memory. We are not going to ask you blind rules, but we are going to definitely try and make a question paper. So paper is not yet ready. So therefore, it's a good feedback that you have given. We will keep this in mind when we frame the question paper to the extent possible. But the exam will have to be, unfortunately, conventional type. Without, we cannot, okay, we can have a case study in the examination, but the evaluation will be again based on automated systems like multiple choice questions. Okay. Another question from Prachi is about, will this course cover any future requirements, readiness of the airports or for sustainable engines, aircraft, or designing of vertiports or for the electrical propulsion air taxis? So the course already has one small section on vertiport design layout. We are also going to talk about sustainable aviation through the interactive sessions that we conduct. And we are also going to talk about electric propulsion, but not necessarily in the detail that you are expecting. And this is the first time the course has been offered. So every year, there is a possibility for us to include more lectures and more material and maybe remove some material, making it redundant. So yes, it is possible for us to incorporate these things in the future versions of this course. Now I would like to proceed with an interesting case study on the world's shortest scheduled flight. This particular flight takes place from a place called Westray to Papa Westray and back. The distance between the two of them is only 1.7 miles. And these are two islands in Scotland. Okay. So the flight is conducted regularly. The geometry of the route is very interesting. From Westray to Papa Westray and back, the distance of 2.7 kilometers, but it is completely over the sea. Okay, completely over the water. And this is a route which is flown under visual flight rules. That means the pilot is responsible for maintaining the separation. And it is a non-IFR, without any instrumented flying, non-IFR critical route. We did an online search on the cost of the ticket for this 2.7 kilometers. And we found that the flight is scheduled for about 3 minutes. Okay. the flight duration is 3 minutes and the fare quoted by the airline is Logan Air is the airline using a Britain Normal Islander. The fare is 2,285 rupees for a 2.7-kilometer journey. Right. Now, the question I want to really touch upon is, why is there a scheduled flight? Now, when I say scheduled flight, I mean it is happening every day at regular intervals. So why are they scheduling a flight at such an awkward time and such an awkward short distance? So let us do some calculations. We have already covered the direct operating cost estimation. So we will use that particular knowledge to arrive at the block time. So the time taken for taxi out and lineup is just about 2 minutes. Takeoff and climb is only half a minute. There is hardly any cruise because by the time you take off and climb, you have reached the point from where you start descending for landing. So descent and landing is half a minute. And then taxiing in and shutdown is another 2 minutes. So the total time of this flight is about 5 minutes. Imagine a commercial flight for which you have all the rules applicable. There is a pilot, there is an aircraft, and you have to pay fare. And the total time of the flight is 5 minutes max. Actual flight time is only about 2 minutes. Now, what would be the average speed? You cover 2.7 kilometers in about 6 minutes total. I have added 1 minute extra, so it's 0.1 hour. So the block speed is 27 kilometers per hour. Okay. It demonstrates the dominance of ground operations because 2 minutes is spent in taxi out and 2 minutes in taxi in. The question is why we have this route. This is something you must be wondering, right? Such a short distance, why do we have this route? So the reason for this is something called as public service obligation or PSO. Under PSO, certain routes have to be operated by the government or the government has to outsource its responsibility to some private sector to provide connectivity to the public who lives. So there are people in West Ray, there are people in Papa West Ray, and they can of course travel by ships, but the ships are going to take about half an hour. So to save their time and to allow them to do it quickly, they have gone for this kind of a service. So the aim is medicines have to be sent, connectivity of useful and important manpower. For example, there is a language teacher who goes every Wednesday on various, she covers so many islands during the week and she covers these 2 islands on one particular day. I think it's a Wednesday. Okay. Now, this is not about making money. This is not about finance. It is about social benefits. And the social benefits are going to outweigh the financial inefficiency of this particular route. Because air transport is a public infrastructure which has to be made available for people they deserve to be given connectivity because just because they are staying in the remote area doesn't mean that we forget about them. For lots of, in India also we have many helicopter flights in the northeast where we don't charge very high fare, but we provide connectivity. I have myself traveled from Guwahati to a place called Naharlagun, which is near the capital of Arunachal Pradesh by a helicopter, and it was covered under the LTC rules of Government of India. So I have gone with my family to this place, Naharlagun from Guwahati on a helicopter onwards as well as return at rates which are affordable as per the rules. Now, let's look at the matching of the performance of the aircraft. The aircraft which is used for this particular operation is called as the BN-2 Islander. The word Islander itself tells you what is the purpose of this aircraft. It is an aircraft which works best to hop from one island to the other. That's why the name itself is called as Britain Norman Islander, and 2 stands actually for 2 engines, which you can see in the figure. There is 1 engine on each wing. So this aircraft has got a short takeoff and landing capability, which is very much useful, definitely for operating this particular scenario. And it has a high wing configuration that gives you obstacle clearance because the wing is far away from the ground. So any ground obstacle or debris or anything else on the ground which can actually become what is called as a foreign object damage or FOD, there is less chance of FOD if the wing is far away from the ground, and that's why high wing. The aircraft has a very robust landing gear that is required because it is going to have multiple takeoffs and landing. And it will spend more time on the ground and less time in the air. As you saw just now, the total time in the air was 1 minute, cruise, but ground operations were the major operations. Also, this aircraft is very much self-sufficient. It does not depend on the local infrastructure at the airports for its operation. Like in many small aircraft like this, the door itself has got a small staircase so that the pilots can just open the door and it touches the ground and people step on that and get out or get in. So you don't need to provide any special stand or a staircase. So like that, there are many features in this aircraft that make it independent of the location where it is going to be there. Let's now look at the performance diagram of the aircraft. So the mission of this aircraft is essentially dominated by the takeoff distance, the initial climb gradient, because we need to clear the obstacle height. And when you come into land after about 1.5 to 2 minutes, you have to absorb the energy by using the brakes at landing. In this aircraft, unlike any other transport aircraft, there is absolutely no scope for optimizing the cruise phase because there is no cruise phase. One of the cribs that people have is that because there is no cruise, we don't get any food or any drinks in the flight. Okay, because in all aircraft which have a cruise phase, generally you have serving of some food or some beverages. But here there is no beverages and no food because there is no cruise. Now, the sector length is 2.7 kilometers, which is very, very extremely short length. Now, since you are operating from here to there only, there is a very little chance that you are going to have diversion. So you don't have to worry about deciding the alternate. The alternate is actually what you have. So you don't fly if you know that if you are operating from West Papare and if you know that Papare has got a bad weather, you don't fly. Okay, that's it. There are no alternatives. So the go no-go decisions are simply driven by weather. Although the flight is very short, if the weather is bad, there will be no permission given and the flight will be postponed. So this is a very useful case for extreme illustration of an air transportation application. Let's look at the environmental metrics. That is, how much is the fuel burned per flight? Actually, it's a very low number because the flight itself is a very short duration flight. Okay. But for the emissions which are generated per kilometer, it is very high because the fuel is consumed, but kilometer is very small. So if you have a very small denominator, the ratio becomes very high, right? The absolute emissions are small because the amount of fuel consumed is very less, but amount of fuel consumed per kilometer is very high. Then when we have this kind of a situation where the fuel burn per flight is low and therefore the emissions are low, but emissions per kg are very high, then you have a question regarding, do we really are we really doing correctly to use this kind of a metric for the selection process? Okay. Now, there is a requirement for it to be consistent from the regulatory bodies. So, the airworthiness standards that are applicable on this aircraft are same as those applicable on any other aircraft for a bigger range or much more complex operations. You cannot say that I'm just going from here to there by aircraft, so give me some concessions. The same airworthiness standards apply for this aircraft. The same duty rules for crew are applying for this aircraft also. The way you maintain the aircraft, so many man hours per flight hours, so many pre-flight checks, they are always there. You may have fly for only 3 minutes, but you have to do the proper maintenance checks, right? Despite having a radically different mission length, you have all these things same. And that is to ensure the passenger safety. Because if you don't do that, it will start becoming very dangerous for the passengers. So despite radically different mission length, the requirements of the regulatory bodies are consistent. Let us have an estimate of the cost per passenger per kilometer flown. Now, here we make some assumptions. Based on the data of the Britain Norman Islander BN2 available, we have to assume the operating cost to be approximately 600 pounds, UK pounds per flight. Now you will see the numbers in pounds because the study was done for operations in the British Isles which work in pounds. But eventually I'm going to convert these numbers into rupees to give you a feel. Okay. The aircraft can take 6 passengers. So the passenger kilometer is 6 into 2.7. And the cost is going to be approximately 37 pounds per passenger kilometer. So if you just divide the total cost of 600, divide by 6 or 2.6 and 2.7, you will get 37 pounds per passenger kilometer. So this is an order of magnitude higher than truck routes. When you travel with trucks, you might spend $1, $1.50 or pounds per passenger kilometer. And here you are spending 10 times more. Which is fine because this is the way it is. Very small distance and very less number of passengers. Now, let's discuss a few points. What, according to you, would be the minimum viable distance for air travel? The example which I showed you is that of Papare to West Papare and back. The one-way distance is about 2.7 nautical miles. When you multiply that by 1.6, you get roughly the kilometers, okay? And that number will come to how much? You can just work out yourself. So the question that we want to ask is, what is the minimum viable distance for air travel? Do you think that for this particular route, the electric aircraft will be more suitable rather than an IC engine? Probably the answer is yes. Should we normalize the emissions per kilometer? Is this a good way to do it? Because here the kilometers are very small. The emissions will appear because some fuel is consumed. But if you use electrical, then that also becomes very, very low. Then is there a requirement to provide subsidy to the passengers for operating this route? Or should the total money be paid by the people who are using it? Is it fair to use it that way? What is the role of subsidy in air transportation? That is what we need to discuss. But there are some basic takeaways from this particular discussion. And those key takeaways are as follows. Number 1. In air transportation, you cannot use only the requirement cannot be just efficiency. It has to be more than that. So air transport is not necessarily only about cost per passenger per kilometer. If you look at extreme cases, they do reveal some system limits, such as the one that we have just now discussed. Imagine if the requirement is that between each flight, between each two flights, there has to be a 30-minute or 40-minute maintenance activity by the engineers. So passengers are waiting for 30, 40 minutes for a 2-minute flight. Okay, but that has to be done. So extreme system limits are revealed when we examine such cases. Then there is a very strong interaction between the policy, the performance, and economics. When you have such a scenario where there are too few people, but service has to be maintained. So immediately there is a motivation for us to replace the current aircraft BN2 Highlander with an electrical version of that aircraft. But that doesn't come cheap. If you ask, today only they are having a trial flight, and we realized that it's not straightforward. When you have an ultra short sector with no cruise phase, then definitely these kind of aircraft with electrical propulsion, they become very attractive. Because fuel aircraft have very high emissions per kilometer, and these aircraft, they have very low absolute energy requirement. Okay? They are ideal aircraft for early adopter routes for electrical aviation. In other words, when an airline wants to start operation between two cities to test the market, this is a very good way of doing it using electrically powered aircraft. You will not spend so much money, but you will test the market and you will be able to gauge whether or not we should operate in this scenario. So again, we will do some simple back of the envelope estimates of the energy consumed or required by this prototype aircraft. So once again, the data is like this. Sector length is 2.7 kilometers only. We assume that 0.15 kilowatt hour per seat kilometer is used by the electrical STOL aircraft. For this, you need to go through the literature and find out what is the total energy requirements of such small aircraft. It's very small. About 0.15 kilowatt hour per seat per kilometer. Now, you can probably push 8 seats in the aircraft. So the energy consumed will be the distance into the seats. Okay, that is 33.2 kilowatt hour per flight. Now, the next important point is, okay, I've taken care of the temperature by putting some material to heat the enclosure, but one must look at the battery feasibility. A typical battery of a small electric aircraft, it is between 40 to 100 kilowatt hour. But this route requires very low energy. It will only require 1/10 of the capacity. Okay. And therefore, before each time you come back, there are multiple rotations possible. It's not that like an aircraft, typically you have to charge or you have to load the fuel in after every flight. No. You can save by doing multiple hops, multiple rotations per charge. The battery mass penalty that it has is acceptable. It's not too good, but it is acceptable for providing this facility. Now, why are we talking about electrical aircraft? Why are we suggesting them for this particular mission? Because they come with zero local emissions. They normally use a battery or a fuel cell. Fuel cell, as you might know, is a cell which absorbs atmospheric conditions, and it uses, there are some which use water, which is then electrolyzed into hydrogen and oxygen, used for propulsion, and then you combine it, and then you get water vapor again. So there are many such ways in which you can achieve zero local emissions using electrical aircraft. They are much quieter, just like many of the people who have used cars that are electrical propelled. You are standing at a traffic junction an electrical car comes and stops next to you and starts, you won't even notice it because they are very, very low noise footprint. Because they don't have to have an IC engine to create the thrust. Okay. They also have very low maintenance cost because the only thing that takes the load is the bearing on the wheel. Everything else can be easily managed. So creating the noise arrestor for a small aircraft, electrical aircraft, is no big deal. Then, because it is useful for short distance zero local emissions, it is very popularly used in tourist destinations. It's very suitable for highland operations. Okay. One of the countries that comes to my mind is Maldives. Maldives is the country which has got a large number of small aircraft for transporting passengers from one place to the other. And for short distance operations, as operations onto nearby islands, nothing can beat an aircraft, as we will see very soon. But there are operational challenges. Okay. The challenge is that the battery has some degradation under very cold and very hot conditions. Normally, people are worried about the high temperature batteries, whether they themselves generate so much heat. And is that heat recoverable? Is that heat possible for you to use? The answer is no, we can't use. This is one limitation. Cold weather, battery degradation. The other one is that you need to provide charging infrastructure at these remote islands. Now, going there is so difficult. Forget about taking the infrastructure for charging. Then there are requirements of certification and redundancy. Redundancy is provided for safety. You have multiple systems which play a role. If one breaks, the other one will take over and take that role. So that leads to duplication, but it gives requirement from the industry can come. Then you have abundant fleet availability because you are shuttling so often that within 6 minutes you are back. So max that somebody has to wait. If nobody goes for that boat ride, then you have to wait only for 5 minutes. Okay. Now let us do a comparison of fuel versus electric on a system-based comparison. So you can see fuel aircraft are powered, proven and available. They have high cost per kilometer. On the other hand, we have electric aircraft with low operating cost, but they depend on infrastructure, depend on the island, and the capital cost is uncertain. So I already mentioned to you about public policy and PSO implications, so I'll not spend too much time here. The key insights is that the shortest routes are the worst for fuel aircraft, and potentially they are best for electric aircraft. Now, by using technology, you can invert the logic and come up with aircraft which are suitable for short distance flights. Okay. And this policy ultimately changes the adaptation. Now, let us calculate the block time of this aircraft, which is 2.7 kilometer distance is the block range. Okay. Aircraft already know, no cruise. Again, the same thing. Taxi out lineup is 2 minutes. Take on taxi and shutdown is 2 minutes. Take off and climb is 30 seconds. Descent and landing is 30 seconds. There is no cruise available. Total block time will be 5 or 6 minutes. Okay. Now, if you assume that the operating cost per flight is 600 pounds, this is an assumption. Then there are 6 passengers, so you have to shell out 100 pounds per passenger. 100 pound today will cost you about 1024 rupees. No, sorry. That will be 1 pound. 1 pound is going to cost you 124 rupees. So 600 pounds is going to cost you 600 into 1 point so much, and it's going to be quite long. Okay. So the value will be 6 passengers into 2.7 kilometers, 16.2 passenger kilometer. And therefore, the cost per passenger is a hefty amount of 37 pounds per pax per kilometer. That means the passengers are supposed to pay for every kilometer they travel. They have to pay 37 pounds if they take this flight, which is much, much more than conventional aircraft.
Yeah, hello. So, unfortunately, the server in the studio suddenly crashed, so we are not able to continue, but we will resume in the next class. I'm just using the phone of the teaching assistant to communicate to those of you who are online so that you don't feel suddenly what happened. Okay, so this will not be available on YouTube, this particular part which I am talking right now. So, what we can do is, in case, okay, maybe it is there. So in case somebody would like to ask any question, because I can't share the PPT on this particular system. In case you have any comment or questions, let us take it. We have only 5 minutes remaining. So those who are online, you are welcome to. Yeah, so please feel free if you want to interact. We have a few minutes remaining. Actually, there are just two participants. And that is the host and Yash. So I think we should stop this meeting.